On today's Film and Whiskey, I'm flying solo for an unscheduled bonus episode. We have some fantastic interview guests, and I get to drink a whiskey that would make Brad jealous. That's all ahead on Film and Whiskey. Hey everyone, welcome into the podcast. I'm Bob Book. Brad is not joining us today. He is still taking some well-deserved time off from having his first child, so congratulations again to Brad. I'm back today with an unplanned bonus episode. I received an email the other day saying that our guests today wanted to come on the show and talk about their new product, and when Woodford Reserve comes a-knockin', you don't say no. I'm joined today by Woodford Reserve Master Distiller Chris Morris and Assistant Master Distiller Elizabeth McCall. We're here to talk about the new Woodford Reserve Masters Collection, very fine, rare bourbon, and we're going to get to that. But before we get there, Chris Morris, this is your second appearance on our show. The first time you were here, we talked about your favorite films. I had no idea that you were such an expert at 1950s sci-fi, but that episode was such a blast that I have just been dying to talk to you since. Thanks for being here today. How are you, sir?
Very, very fine. Thank you, Rob. Bob, I enjoyed our last visit. That was so fun.
We're also joined today by Assistant Master Distiller Elizabeth McCall. Elizabeth, it sounds like Chris has kind of set the bar pretty high for movie breakdowns, and we may not have a chance to talk about your favorite movie today, but just know that Chris has become a favorite around here. But it is so good to meet you. I cannot wait to get into talking about today's product. Thanks for being on the show. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. And I have to say, Chris Morris is like no other. I mean, knowledge and breadth of knowledge of different topics is always astounding to me. So I don't know if I can quite reach that bar. Maybe on my tippy toes.
Shoot.
Well, if you don't mind me giving just a little bit of a bio for you, Elizabeth, since this is your first time on our show. Elizabeth started out in the R&D department at Brown-Forman in 2009 as a sensory expert. She quickly rose through the ranks in that field, eventually working with Brown-Forman to train people at different brands under the Brown-Forman name in their sensory methodology. Eventually, she caught the attention of Chris Morris and was named the Master Taster at Woodford Reserve before becoming Assistant Master Distiller. She continues to rack up the accolades. I just saw that she was named one of Wine Enthusiast's 40 under 40 for 2020. So Elizabeth, congratulations on that accomplishment.
Thank you very much. It was a huge honor, and just all of it is just astounding to me. And I just got to keep working hard to keep going.
So my first question for both of you today, I love that you both came up through the R&D worlds with Brown-Forman. And obviously, it's not, totally out of the ordinary for a master distiller to have a background in the sort of chemistry and the development side of things. But we've done enough episodes of this podcast now that we've interacted with some whiskey brands whose master distillers are really just kind of installed in a figurehead sort of role. And you guys seem to be the exact opposite of that. And so how unusual, I guess, is it for somebody in a position like yours to still be as heavily involved in the research and development side of things as you both are?
Well, thank you for saying we're involved. We're very proud that every product under the Woodford Reserve umbrella we've created, proposed, created, and that also takes great partnership with our brand teams and sales teams. So we work as one team at Brown-Forman, parent company of Woodford Reserve, of course. But at Brown-Forman, the distiller is in charge of the product. So we're very, very proud of that tradition. We continue on, and Elizabeth, of course, is still heading a lot of our R&D. Not still heading; she is heading a lot of our R&D initiative. So I'll let her talk about that.
Yeah, Bob, I think it's really interesting at Brown-Forman too. I'm in a development program. It is not a title that is just thrust upon someone. It is a full development that takes years and years of working in the distilleries, getting to know all the teams, and then also knowing the commercialization side, the supply chain side, the marketing side. So it really is something that Brown-Forman takes a lot of pride in, and it's somebody that has technical, but then the marketing side as well. So it's a very unique role within the company. And it's one that, I think coming up through R&D has been beneficial for me. And as Chris mentioned, I still work with those teams to develop our innovation. So it's a team effort. And I work with our processing team to really get down to the nitty gritty of how do we take a concept that I've talked through with Chris and we've talked it through. And I said, I think that this flavor sounds interesting for a whiskey. And then we work out the kinks with our processing team to understand how do we do this, and how do we work to make sure that the micro side works and fermentation, and then scaling it up, because scalability is a huge component when it comes to innovation. We can do a lot of small things at our pilot plant and have fun, and maybe that becomes a distillery series, but for something to be scalable to become a master's collection is definitely a huge challenge. And it's something we work with our teams closely on.
Elizabeth, you started out as a sensory expert in the quality department at Brown-Forman. In doing background, I thought this was like the most interesting thing, that you actually were training to go into psychology, and then in the sensory field, they kind of seek out psychology majors because it's a huge component of the sensory experience. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit? Why is it that sensory is looking for people with psychology backgrounds?
Yes, actually, the entire team I worked with at the time, and I believe still, the sensory team is all comprised of people with psychology degrees. And that is because in sensory, you're using human beings as your instrument. And so it's looking at human response. It's the same thing if I were doing a psychological assessment on someone and trying to see behaviorally how they're working or how their mind is working. It's the same kind of concept with sensory. And it's a very methodical practice and something that you need to know the statistics on how to analyze your results and properly set up an experiment so that you are eliminating different variables and making sure that you can really know what you're testing for. And so we have 3 different areas within sensory just to break down what it is we're trying to look for in our testing. So we have quality control, which is where I started out. And then we also have our research side, which is all the shelf life testing. So any product out there on the market goes through these sort of sensory tests, depending on the product. But you do shelf life testing, or if you're reformulating something, you're going to test it in a lab first to see if people can figure out, is there a visual difference or a nose or taste difference. And then we look at it from a consumer side as well, going through a consumer advisory panel. So, and then we have a descriptive analysis panel. So we really have, 4 different panels at our fingertips.
So when you're interviewing for a job like that, or when you go in for your performance review, how are they testing your palate and your nose, things like that? I'm kind of just picturing those game shows where they put a blindfold on somebody and feed them tartar sauce off of a spoon or something. How do they gauge how fine-tuned your palate is?
Well, we do get tested, but it's not going to make or break us having our job, I guess, because my job as the sensory technician was to run panels and analyze data and really help our plants troubleshoot whenever they have a quality issue. So that's really your goal. And then the bonus is that you become highly trained with your palate because you're dealing with all these, the whiskeys or the different liqueurs you're making every day. And the other component of that is, how do you make sure that you are a good instrument? And so Chris sits on the panels. So we have these panels that run all of our regular live samples, but then we put in marker samples or spiked samples to make sure that people are properly evaluating and catching those. And if you don't do well, your data doesn't get counted. So you are essentially considered broken for that panel. And your data is not used. So there's a way that we calibrate to make sure that our panelists all know how to properly nose and taste, pick out any defects, and can do different tasks that are required for sensory work.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Yeah, there is a way to check it, but it doesn't mean if I don't get it that day, my job is next. pretty. I don't know. Chris might say have a different opinion.
I was going to say, you might be cutting it closer than you think, actually. So, Elizabeth, the first time we had Chris on here, I mean, it's very obvious that he is known for his innovative spirit. And one of the things that you've become really passionate about and known for is returning the production of rye grain to Kentucky, especially because of the conservation efforts involved in that. But when it comes to the more innovative and experimental things, is there a grain that you prefer to work with? Is it rye because of your focus on rye, or is there maybe another one that you like to toy with a little bit more in your mash bills, without giving away any top secret recipes that are coming up? What do you like to experiment with in terms of grains?
Well, that's a great question. A lot of it, so I feel like a lot of my brainstorming, I always bounce off of Chris, because Chris is the original just master innovator. And kind of you have to look at not just something that we're passionate about, but also what is the market, what are people looking for? And so, yes, I'm very passionate about rye, and more particular, just not because of that grain in particular, but because of the overall project of the sustainability, regenerative agricultural practices that it is helping to bring back and supporting Kentucky. There's so many positive elements to that. But when it comes to looking at flavor, Chris and I will sit down and talk about like different roasted notes. We did chocolate malted rye, which was I worked with the new make on that, but Chris, worked on that grain recipe. And so after I fell in love with that whiskey and then talking to him about what can we do, we went down and looked at, there's a whole library of different roasted grains and just kind of thinking of ideas of how, from a flavor standpoint, and then also what's the story and how do we market this? Because that's another component to it, is not just, does it taste good, but why do we want to do this? And what's the thought process behind it?
Well, and that's one of the things that I've really appreciated about the Masters collection in general, is that Woodford is not afraid to put its name on some of these more experimental mash bills. You're talking about chocolate malt, and I've seen the oat one as well. And I feel like Woodford is really on the cutting edge of some of these more experimental mash bills and grain recipes. I just saw one the other day from a smaller distiller here in Ohio that uses spelt in their grain recipe. And, I know you guys may not have gone that far yet, but I think it says a lot about Woodford that it continues to plant its flag in that experimental mindset. And I guess that's a good segue into talking about the Masters collection here. Chris, I'm wondering if maybe for our listeners, you could just give us a brief history of the Masters collection. What was the impetus behind it? What sparked this really innovative collection and run of whiskeys that you all are doing under the heading of the Masters collection?
Certainly. This is our 16th release. So going back 16 years of bottles on the shelf, which means production predates that. So from the very, very early years, we were innovating and experimenting. And that goes back to Owsley Brown the late Owsley Brown, who's the creator of Woodford Reserve, chairman of Brown-Forman at the time. And Owsley said that Woodford Reserve would be the home of innovative whiskeys, plural. And I took that comment to heart. And of course, innovation in our industry really began or was solidified at our current building long before we owned it, when James Christopher Crowe and Oscar Pepper again defined the sour mash process, the use of new charred oak barrels, and also introduced other aspects of modern bourbon production, whiskey production to Kentucky in the United States. So we were playing off that history of innovation. And also we wanted to these are the early years, Bob, before bourbon was even popular again. And we thought that this would give us a good chance to develop future products, as a trial, and also to generate some publicity, some PR, to get stories written about the Woodford Reserve Distillery. So there were multiple aspects to the concept, and chose the name Masters Collection. I chose that name, and it was, again, to honor the masters of the past. I was not bold enough at the time or to want to honor us. It was about the past. And again, we're pushing the envelope. And as you very kindly noted, we have done it. We've introduced wood finishes to America in a way that no one ever had thought before, using varietal wines, using all new woods such as sugar maple, introducing oats to bourbon and other specialty grains. And just, the list is 16 long. So this current release marks a transition. We're still going to be innovative, but now the Master's Collection is about Elizabeth and myself. And that's noted in the hang tag, the little brochure booklet that is affixed to each bottle. We're no longer talking about the past, we're talking about the future. So this is a bridge. The product is a bridge to the past, and the new package and going forward, the name is a bridge to the future, or the present, you might want to say. So Elizabeth's name joins my name on the product, and it's about the masters of today and tomorrow going forward. So it's about innovation. It's about potentially developing future products. Our rye whiskey came from the Master's Collection. Double Oaked came from the Master's Collection. Our wheat and malt whiskeys have come from the Master's Collection. Those were the sounding boards, as Elizabeth was saying, with consumers for tweaking them and changing them for scalability purposes. But they've led to our current products. Our Woodford Reserve Baccarat has its foundation in the Master's Collection. So the Master's Collection has really served us well.
Well, and that takes us into talking about today's whiskey, which is this Master's Collection Very Fine Rare Bourbon. Now, this is a blend of bourbons, with the oldest among them being 17-year-old barrels of Woodford Reserve bourbon, which I believe is the oldest stock that you all had in your possession. These 17-year-old barrels were distilled in Chris's first year as master distiller, 2003. And what I love about it is it just has such a great story to tell. It represents a transition from, honoring the history, but looking towards the future. But I want to zero in on these 17-year-old barrels. This is a huge deal. Did it just come to a point where they had hit the perfect maturity point and you said, okay, it's time to pull the trigger on these? Were you holding them back with this sort of a release in mind? How do you, just kind of let something sit around aging for that long? I'm curious to hear the story behind those barrels.
They were not intended for, this product was not conceived because, as you well know, we do not believe in age claims or age statements. Thus, there is none. And very fine, rare whiskey is using terms from the past, from Oscar Pepper and James Christopher Crow's day, because they didn't use age statements in the past. They use those kind of terms for older whiskeys. And we have all this in various old advertisements that we've obtained from the University of Kentucky, the Kentucky Historical Society, and the Filson Historical Society in Louisville, as well as our own archives. So again, there's that nod to the past, using the old terms for very rare, special whiskeys. And the core, the oldest barrels in this group were through experimentation. We were seeing how long we could hold barrels in our unique heat cycled warehousing. So these barrels they just got to a point where they were so old, and the yield or the volume left in the barrels was getting so low as well. And I tasted them, took samples of each, and then had Elizabeth taste them, and they were just incredible. Like, oh my gosh, these are so good. Let's put them to use before they're all gone. They would have been gone in a couple more years. The barrels would have been empty. So that's why, as Elizabeth has learned from me, is sometimes just opportunities present themselves. You hadn't planned on them, but like, ooh, here's something we might be able to use. And that's what we did.
Well, and I'm just so curious about these 17-year-old barrels because it's so unusual to see whiskey that's been aged that long in the bourbon world. And generally, it's considered much, much riskier to age bourbon for that long as opposed to like a Scotch whiskey, because at some point the oak kind of overtakes things and you've just given up too much to the angels. I'm wondering, as you continued to go back to these barrels, as they aged and as you took samples, was there an element that you were kind of playing with fire the more and more you went back to the well and said, maybe not yet, let's let them sit a little while longer? Does it seem risky to you to take that approach?
Oh, yes. And let's be clear, this bottling is not all 17-year-old whiskey. It's a batching of barrels that are all still quite old. There's 12s and 13s and some 11s. So it's a batching of various ages, but they're flavor profiles. And I think, again, it's one of the so many storylines that we can't cover them all on a package. The importance of batching, which is the fundamental practice at Woodford Reserve. We batch barrels together to develop a flavor profile. So some of the barrels may have been woody. I can't say they all they were or they weren't. Some could have been. I can't remember each and every barrel. But again, we're batching them with other very rare fine barrels to come up with what we thought was a winning flavor combination. And of course, it's a master's collection. So it's its own standard. We don't compare it to anything. We compare it only to itself. And we don't have to make it again because master's collection is a one-time release. So it's a unique flavor profile created from batching our oldest barrels together to come up with what we did.
Well, and I've been sipping on this throughout our discussion, and if I could just give even the briefest of tasting notes here, what immediately jumps out to me on the nose is the rye spice just jumps out of the glass on this. Obviously, there's a great oak character from the 17-year that's kind of bumping up some of that oak-heavy, aged scent and flavor here. But the predominant thing for me on the nose is the rye spice. And then on the flavor, there's some really great fruit notes. It's incredibly fruity, which I was not necessarily expecting. There's some great summery stone fruit, like a peach, but then also some much darker elements, like a raisin, plum, and a little bit of red wine character as well. But the crazy thing is that this doesn't fall outside the general sort of flavor profile of Woodford Reserve. It's a great kind of marrying of these additional fruity flavors into what we all know and love with the Woodford Reserve flavor profile.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, you want to mention anything on the flavor profile?
Other than just, we taste our barrels throughout maturation. And whenever we have something kind of earmarked as a special project or as special project or future master's collection, distillery series, whatever you want to call it, we make sure we have access to those barrels and we taste them on a regular basis. So they're very nurtured and loved from the get-go. Not that we don't love and nurture all of our barrels, but we can't possibly taste every single barrel we have resting. Chris and I would do nothing but live in warehouses. But we taste every batch. We always give a quality rating to every batch of whiskey we produce. And then when we have things that we're earmarking for something special, we keep tasting and we make sure that they hit the flavor we're looking for. And with these, we you taste them as they're aging and it kind of hit that sweet spot. And some of them, and all the barrels that went into these batches is master's collection. So it was just kind of a fun project, a good learning for me. On kind of how we monitor whiskey that goes that long, because we struggle to age a long time in our warehouses because they are heat cycled. So this is not something that we can do and have it be a real winning thing, because we're going to see whiskey lost at a greater rate than most warehouses in Kentucky.
Yeah, we've had a barrel that if you looked at its contents by itself, it had 6 bottles of whiskey in it.
Wow. So it is very fine and rare indeed. I love that. Well, the other thing that's debuting along with this product is this new bottle design that you all have, which is just absolutely gorgeous. And, I've always said, I love Woodford Reserve and their bottles, but I just can't use it as a weapon. So I feel like you have really remedied that. It's got a nice club shape to it now. I'm wondering if you could just give any insight on, the development of this bottle. What was the thought process behind kind of this new design, this new rebranding of the collection?
Well, again, the pot still shaped bottle, the now familiar pot still shaped bottle, was a not a generic bottle by any means, but it was a bottle that we did not own, but we had some rights to it over the years, and we didn't have anything else. We had the original Woodford bottle, didn't have double oaked or Baccarat, and again, going back so many years, how can you foretell the future? But now, as we've expanded to the Distiller's Select range with 4 expressions, and then we've added double oak with its unique bottle and Baccarat with its unique bottle, it was time to look at that pillar that held the Master's Collection and batch proof. And again, that bottle didn't look like the family anymore because the family had grown. So the brand team decided to design a new bottle that we would own 100%, that would fit in with the price tiering, with the premiumness of the family, and of course look like Woodford, look like it belonged to the Woodford Reserve family. And I think they've come up with a real nice response to that. And there we have it.
I never thought of it as a weapon, but I'm holding.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for. We're constantly trying to give new ideas. So you're welcome for that one. So, Elizabeth, I can't let you go today without talking about one other thing that we do here on the Film and Whiskey podcast. When we had Chris the first time, he joined us for a series of bonus episodes that we do called My Favorite Movie. And we kind of hinted earlier that he brought up a Western, and he also brought up The Day the Earth Stood Still. I'm wondering, for you, if you could maybe just give us a small teaser of what your favorite movie might be, because I'd love to have you back on the show. We'd love to do a My Favorite Movie bonus episode and talk about this at length. But if you, on the spot, if we asked you what your favorite movie was, what would you say?
Okay. I had 2 come to mind, and they're both very, very different films. First of all, Forrest Gump is I love that movie. I could sit down and watch it at any time, start watching it no matter where it is in the movie. I know what they're going to say next. I just love that movie. Another one that I love is Steel Magnolias. So,
oh yeah.
I mean, that's just a classic for any, I think, Southern woman. You just love Steel Magnolias. Yeah. So the holiday movies, though, what Chris Pointer was talking about is that we all really like Christmas Vacation. I mean, and when somebody doesn't know that movie, it just, it's my soul. I don't understand how you don't know Christmas Vacation, but that's definitely a classic.
Well, this sounds like a fantastic future episode is shaping up already. Chris and Elizabeth, I cannot thank you enough for being on the show today. Everybody, this has been Woodford Reserve Master Distillers Chris Morris and Assistant Master Distiller Elizabeth McCall talking about this new Woodford Reserve Master's Collection release, Very Fine Rare Bourbon. Guys, it's fantastic. If you get a chance to try a sip of it, it is absolutely worth it. I have to say thank you both again for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you again on Monday for a regularly scheduled episode. But until then, I'm Bob Book, and we'll see you next time.